Bad Homburg, Germany. A small lawn. Not center court. Not the place where people expect history to happen. But here, on June 24th, something unusual is being set in motion. On one side of the net, a 21-year-old player who just won the Birmingham title and who defeated the world number 2 just days before. On the other side of the grid, no, not the other side. On the same side, Venus Williams, 46 years old, 7-time Grand Slam singles champion. And for the first time in their careers, they will stand on the same side of the net, looking in the same direction, sharing every point. They call this a beautiful news story, a viral tale. Generation meets generation. But if you look a little closer, there's a question nobody really answers. Why now? Let's do the math. In 1994, Venus Williams made her professional debut. 11 years later, in 2005, Alex Eala was born. 11 years. That's not just an age difference. It's two completely different worlds of tennis. Venus learned to play tennis in an era before social media tracked every shot and every expression on the court. Eala grew up in an era where every shot was dissected, shared, and commented on within seconds of it happening. A person practices tennis in relative silence. A person practices tennis under constant camera lens. And now, those two worlds stand on the same side of the field, sharing one ball, one strategy, one outcome. The story of Eala, if you haven't been following it, began very quickly in the last few weeks. A title in Birmingham, then to Berlin, where she did something very few people her age have ever done. Defeated Elena Rybakina, world number 2, right on the grass court. No one needed to say anything more after that match. Performance speaks for itself. You don't need a legend to speak up in praise. Just look at the results and ask yourself, who is following this girl? The answer, it turns out, is a lot of people, including the person on the other side of this story. Venus Williams needs no introduction. But the Venus Williams of 2026, that's a different story from the Venus of memory. This isn't a legend taking a celebratory stroll. This is a 46-year-old woman truly competing again, game after game, round after round, step onto the court with no guarantees. A few months ago, she competed in singles in Madrid. She lost in the first round. This wasn't a stroll of a retired legend returning for a commemorative photo. It was an athlete truly battling to rediscover her rhythm, match after match, with nothing privileged because of the name she bore. And then, in the midst of her journey to rediscover that rhythm, she chose a partner. Not a veteran player from her generation, not a safe, predictable name, easy to control the risks. She chose Eala. This is where the story starts to get a little more interesting. Because if you think this is a perfect, calculated moment for the media, the reality is much messier. Just hours before they stepped onto the court together, both had suffered defeats. Eala lost in the first round of singles in 2 straight sets to Elise Mertens, and Venus also lost in a tense 3-set match in the same round. 2 people on the same day, on the same court, both received an unexpected result. And that's when they stepped onto the court together, for the first time in their careers, to play doubles. Not in a moment of triumph. Not after a victory to celebrate together, to take the perfect photo for social media. And yet, right after 2 defeats, 2 separate disappointments, standing side by side on the same patch of grass. You could call it a coincidence, or you might start asking, is this really a moment to celebrate, or is it something else? Something that is more necessary than something beautiful. Something that both of them, for very different reasons, need right now. They lost in 2 very different ways. Eala lost to Mertens in 2 sets. There were no major turning points, no moments to blame. Just a familiar opponent, someone who knew how to disrupt her rhythm, and a body racing against the most demanding schedule of the year. Venus lost in a different way. 3 sets. A long, back-and-forth match, right up to the tiebreak in the final set. It wasn't a loss for someone who had run out of steam. It was a loss for someone who still had so much to give, but not enough to win. Two kinds of defeat. Two different stories about the same bad day. And a few hours later, they walked out onto the field together. This is where tactical combat gets interesting, because their styles differ not only by generation, they differ by philosophy. Venus is a product of an era where going to the net wasn't an option, it was instinct. Serve, advance, finish the point before your opponent has time to think. That's tennis built on position, on occupying space on the court before your opponent can react. Eala is different. She's a product of the modern baseline generation, deep, powerful ground strokes, calculated down to the millimeter. She doesn't rush to the net. She waits, she creates pressure with the speed of the ball by pushing her opponent out of their comfortable position before deciding to attack. One player controls space. Another player controls time. Combining those two styles into a single doubles team is no simple matter of just adding two good players together. It's a real-time adaptation process, happening right on the court. And this is where the real psychological question begins. Because playing doubles, even with a professional singles player, isn't always as easy as people think. Singles tennis is a solitary sport. You stand alone. You are solely responsible. Every lost point, every wrong decision is your own, no one else shares it. Sometimes it's completely different. You have to believe that someone else will be in the right place. You have to accept that sometimes the outcome isn't in your hands, but in the hands of the person standing next to you. For someone like Eala, who has just gone through a period where all eyes were on her alone, all the pressure was on her entering a competitive relationship where control is shared, right now, carries significant psychological implications. There are two ways to look at that decision. The first way, this is a source of energy. Standing next to someone who has been at the pinnacle of the sport, a 5-time Wimbledon champion, can help a young player temporarily set aside the pressure of having to prove themselves, learn to breathe between points, and learn to believe. The second, less comfortable approach is a way of delaying confronting the real problem. Because if form is stagnating, if the body is fatigued after 4 consecutive tournaments on the field, then taking on another match, a new partner, new pressure is that preparation, or a way to avoid looking directly at what's really happening. No one has a definitive answer. Perhaps even Eala herself doesn't. But one thing is clear. The timing of this decision was not accidental. Wimbledon is just around the corner, 5 days from now, and for the first time in her career, Eala will enter the ring as a seeded player, no longer an outsider, no longer a name nobody pays attention to until she wins. This time, people will be watching her from the very first match. It's a very different kind of pressure than that of an unknown trying to prove something. It's the pressure of someone who has already been recognized and now has to live up to that recognition. And amidst all of that, she chose to step out onto the stage, hand in hand, with someone who had been familiar with this kind of pressure long before she was. Perhaps it's wisdom. Perhaps Venus, more than anyone else, understands how to remain calm when the whole world is watching, and she's quietly passing that on without needing any verbal lessons. Let's take a moment to reflect here. Before discussing the match, there's a small image worth pausing over. 2 people sat next to each other on the bench, waiting for the referee to call their names. Neither spoke much. Venus tied her shoelaces. Eala looked out at the pitch, where the stands were only partially filled. There was nothing dramatic there, just a very ordinary, very human moment before everything began. Then the match began. Venus served first, and within the first few minutes, one thing became immediately apparent. This wasn't a friendly match, nor was it a casual photo opportunity. They played like 2 people who genuinely wanted to win. Eala moved quickly and reacted well to Venus's experienced serves. Venus, on the net, read the game and covered the gaps that a younger player might leave behind. There was no awkwardness between the two of them. No hesitation typical of 2 people who had just met. There was something surprisingly natural about them, as if they had been practicing together for more than one session. There was a point, midway through the first set, when Eala returned a powerful serve towards Venus's feet, and Venus, with just a light touch of her racket, pushed the ball over the net right into the space her opponent had just left. They looked at each other for a second. Neither said anything, but something was understood. It's a form of nonverbal communication, the kind only those who can truly read each other's rhythm can achieve. And just as the game was starting to pick up pace, just as the viewers were beginning to forget the original question, that question came back stronger than ever. Because if this chemistry is real, if these two people, separated by 25 years in age, really understand each other so quickly on the court, what does that say about what they are truly looking for in each other? This wasn't a warm-up match before Wimbledon, but it could be something deeper than that. Finally, let's return to the question that opened this video. Why now? There's a simple answer, and there's a more truthful answer. Simply put, because their schedules clash, because both need a doubles partner before Wimbledon, and because it's just a normal logistical pairing between two people preparing for the same tournament. That's true. But it's not the whole truth. Because if it were just logistics, people wouldn't remember it. They wouldn't stop to ask why. There's something in this moment that goes beyond a simple double partnership job posting. Think about each person's position, right now, in their own story. Venus Williams doesn't need another title to prove who she is. 7 Grand Slam singles titles, 14 Grand Slam doubles titles, a career that has long since completed its most important chapter. She doesn't compete because she needs to. She competes because she still wants to compete. That's a huge difference, one that people sometimes forget. There's a kind of freedom that only comes when the pressure to prove yourself is gone. When you don't need to win to be recognized, you win or you lose because you wanted to experience the game. Nothing more, nothing less. Eala isn't there yet. It might be a long time before she gets there. Right now, each match still carries a different weight, the weight of building, of proving, of maintaining a position just achieved. And this, perhaps, is what is actually happening on the small pitch in Bad Homburg. It's not a legend bestowing a favor upon a young talent. Rather, it's about someone who has completed the journey, standing alongside someone who has only gone a short distance, and in those brief hours, showing the other person a different version of this very career. A version not burdened by individual scores. It wasn't a lecture. Venus didn't sit down and tell Eala about how to manage pressure. It didn't have to. The lesson, if any, lies in the way Venus moves on the court, calm, precise, unhurried, regardless of the score. In the way she handles a lost point without letting it drag down the next. In the way she smiles, genuinely, after a missed shot, because she knows, after 32 years, that a lost point doesn't define a person. Eala is at an age where every loss still feels like a sentence. Perhaps that's exactly what she needs these days. Not a doubles partner to add more games to her week, but a living role model right beside her on how to still love this sport. After all these years, after all this pressure, after all this expectation from others. So what is the answer to the original question? This isn't an escape from the pressure of Wimbledon. It's a different kind of preparation, not tactical preparation, but mental preparation. A way to approach the biggest tournament of the summer, not with the burden alone, but with a recent memory of how much relief it can feel to compete, even when everything else matters. 5 days later, Eala will enter Wimbledon, for the first time as a seeded player. For the first time, with expectations of going ahead of her, rather than following her. What will she bring to that arena? It could be the form from Berlin. It could be the wounds from 2 consecutive defeats. But it could also be that she carries something smaller, harder to see, the way a 46-year-old legend still steps onto the pitch with pure joy, not because she needs to win, but because she still wants to play. That's not a tactic you can write down in a coach's notebook. It's something that can only be seen and felt when you're close, enough to someone who has lived through everything you're afraid of. Ultimately, legacy is not something passed on through a single statement, a lesson, or a moment staged for the camera. Heritage is what people see, unintentionally, in moments when no one needs to act. A legend ties his shoelaces on a small bench in a secondary arena without a center court, without thousands of spectators. and a young talent, sitting nearby, quietly observed not because no one told her to study, but because there are things you can only learn if you're lucky enough to be there. Wimbledon is coming, and perhaps, just perhaps, Eala will enter there as a slightly different person than the one who left Berlin with a defeat in hand, not because of something that was taught, but because something had been seen.